Sand and ashes both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price.
Sand and ashes both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price. You guys did great here. Ashes. And actually, this is a question. Ashes plural, is that correct? Is that correct? Can you explain that? Albedo, new word. That's a new word for me. I didn't know it. I had to check. Okay, I think one of you guys, I remember who. I can't remember the name, though. Spelled it with an I. I did, too. But no, it is an E. Yeah, so I had to look. Kitty litter. Okay, so if you have a cat, you should know kitty litter. Let's go ahead and listen to what he says before I think about cats too much.
Sand and ashes both offer good traction.
Truly ashes. Sand and ashes.
Sand and ashes. Sand and ashes.
And he kept the D here because this is a context word. So he kept the D at links. Sand and ashes.
Sand and ashes both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means.
And once again, albedo is a new word for me.
Low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight.
Which means that they absorb, great job, which means that they absorb sunlight.
Low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. Heating roads quickly to melt ice.
Quickly to, it's a duh sound, right? Quickly to.
Heating roads quickly to melt ice. Heating roads quickly to melt ice. Heating roads quickly to melt ice. Kitty litter is also an option. Kitty litter.
Kitty litter.
Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price.
And you guys did great. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price. Now, a lot of you put commas here and there. Some of you put a comma here. Some of you put a comma here. And I'm not going to say you're wrong. Some of you put a comma here. Remember, if we're going to go comma which, we should have a subject, a noun, okay? So generally I try never putting a comma here unless there is a noun after which, okay? It's unnecessary. And I could have put one here because we're adding a clause, but typically I don't. And I could have put one here, but there was no subject, though I, blah, blah. It's simply adding a prepositional phrase, so I didn't, okay? Now, I understand that you might want to. However, it's actually unnecessary. Not to talk too much about punctuation. But, so ashes is my question. Yeah, practice 2 times. Sand and ashes both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price. Sand and ashes both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price. Sand, good, and ashes, both offer good traction and have low albedo, which means that they absorb sunlight very easily, heating roads quickly to melt ice. This is true, but nothing like salt. Okay, so yes, so and I can add another one here too. Wood chips or sawdust. Okay, so in the country we use wood chips and sawdust on snow too. And these also have very low albedo. It gives us traction. We can walk on it. We can drive on it. It's very good for traction. And they have low albedo, which means they absorb sunlight. They absorb the warmth, and they do melt the roads and stuff, but nowhere near as fast as salt. I asked the question, ashes, is that okay? And so many of your answers were nice. So I liked your answers. Ash, both countable and non-countable. So ashes is plural, right? So we're emphasizing plural. What are we? Here's my question. Are we plural as in amount? Are we emphasizing amount? In my opinion, the answer is as type or source. So it's not the amount, because the amount of, if you take ash, you can kind of see one piece of ash, but when you have an amount of ash together, do you see n ash? No. So that's why it's non-count. Now, it is possible to see n ash. Oh, there's n ash. Okay? It's possible to see an individual tiny piece of ash. But typically, if we're going to look at ash as in countable, we could say the ash of a cigarette, the ash of a tree, the ash of a maple tree, the ash of a birch tree, different type of tree, the ash of a pine tree. Okay, now we have different types of ash, and we can say ashes. In this situation, I don't think he needs to say ashes. Ash is absolutely fine, because we just need regular ash from trees, from tree burning, okay? Wood chip burning, stuff like that. So I don't think he needs to say ash, but maybe he's thinking about individual houses. If you have a fireplace or a wood-burning stove, then you have ash, and oh, he has one too, so there's more ash, so there's ashes. So they're using ashes. That's possible. But the problem that I really have is ashes to ashes, death to death, and some of you even went there. I took my mother's ashes to Vermont. When we say ashes, the phoenix rose from its ashes in a plural sense, and we always use it in plural when we talk about a body. So when we talk about a body that has died and we cremate the body, we always say ashes, the ashes, okay? That is a reference to a burnt, dead body, all right? So that's why I don't really like it here. It's not wrong. It depends on how you're thinking. But in general, just say ash, okay? Ashtray. There's cigarette ash everywhere. There is cigarette ash everywhere. There are cigarette ashes everywhere. Once again, in the ashtray, it's just going to be ash because it's hard to count the individual pieces of ash. But if you see a cigarette butt has that ash, there's one, and there's one, and there's one. Well, now we can say ashes because we're counting those bundles of ash. Does that make sense? I hope so. Anyway, moving on. Kitty litter is also an option, providing excellent traction, though for a very high price. Cat litter is expensive. There's also a product called Eco-Traction, which is a volcanic material that provides traction and is safe to the environment and to animals. That sounds pretty good. Yeah, I'd be interested in that. So now we want to hear from you. What is your solution to fix America's road salt addiction? Road salt addiction. Yeah, we have one. Other countries do too. And where I lived in Minnesota. In Minnesota, salt is illegal. You can't salt the roads. Now I live in Vermont. They always use salt. Very hilly, very hilly. Lots of mountains, and it's dangerous, very dangerous. So you got to use salt out here. What are some other solutions? I have studded tires, which actually means in my tires, I have little tiny pieces of metal that can hook onto the snow and ice. So I'm pretty good, but studded tires are really bad for the roads. Really bad for the roads. Yeah. More trains, but you can't get trains everywhere, especially in mountainous areas. It's even more difficult. Yeah, trains are great, though. Trains don't have a problem with snow. And we have snow tires. We have all-weather tires. We have snow tires, and they're good, but not on ice. The problem is when it gets icy, then you need studs. So snow tires with studs, that's great, but it destroys the road. Very bad for the road. Not easy. Frightful. Fire. at the risk of sounding spiteful, rightful, alternatives, the world over, damp, a massive, roughly, praying at the altar of, the face of the nation, A and B alike, traction, simultaneously, a whopping number, making us think about, downsides, corrosive, runs off, salinity, levels, poses, in some capacity, have taken to ing, pre-soaking, cheese brine, in conjunction with albedo. And let me tell you about the word albedo. I told you in the answers video yesterday that albedo was a new word for me, right? It was. I had to, it sounds like I know it, but I had to check. Oh, what's the spelling? Okay. So I found it yesterday. Last night, I was listening to a podcast. And I listened to the same podcast a lot. And suddenly they started saying the word albedo like 20 different times. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm a native English speaker. And I'm thinking to myself, how many times have they used the word albedo in the past? It's such a tiny, quick word. How many times have they used the word albedo in the past and I didn't catch it and it didn't change the flow of the conversation? How many times did that happen? Wow. So that happened to me. And I've heard this story from you guys. You guys have told me, oh my God, that's the word. I've heard it so many times. Now I know. Well, it happened to me. Okay. It's a very particular science word. But I listened to a podcast that talks a lot about science and space. And they're talking about albedo on the moon and stuff like that. So I was shocked that suddenly I'm hearing albedo.